Good morning on this beautiful Southern California day. I want to thank you for joining this symposium on comparing relevant equity advisor tools to empower or create. I think we have a little back. I'm Douglas Haynes from the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. Before we start today's program, I want to share a land acknowledgement. Of course, we're meeting today at the Arnold and Mabel Beckman Center of the National Academies, but we're also a member of a larger community. And for that reason, UCI acknowledges our presence on the ancestral and unceded land of the Gabrielinos and Guaneños Achaman Nation. As a land-grant university, it is vital to acknowledge and make visible UCI's relationship to Native peoples, to recognize the history of the land on which we learn, discover, and heal, and to affirm the past, present, and future of the Gabrielinos and Guaneños Achaman Nation here in this place. This acknowledgement is a living narrative and serves as a call to action to all members of the UCI community. Names and naming are important, and the title of this symposium is no different. We were intentional about selecting create, as there really is no way forging ahead without creating a plan, and no effective planning without creating space for reflection, dialogue, and comparison about lessons learned. So we invite you today to recognize the impressive value of equity advisors, the value they bring to our campuses to advance the changes we seek more systematically. In this sense, the idea of framing an equity advisor model may be a bit radical or even unusual, even after 20 years. Since equity advisors work outside of the typical department, college, divisional structures to promote change, that has to ultimately come from within the academic context. We also know about their impacts at our local campuses from the reports that they submit that provosts and chancellors review and share and engage with the deans about. We know about their impacts anecdotally on an individual basis. And as recently as 2019, a report and recommendations by the UC Committee on Affirmative Action, Diversity, and Equity acknowledged their important contributions and the need for further attention and growth of the equity advisor model. These sources, above all, acknowledge that equity advisors are visible leaders to advance diversity and promote a climate of equity and inclusion. And it's precisely through these best practices that our campuses can launch and further navigate plans to successfully navigate 2030 goals for faculty growth and student achievement and completion. This is why we're here today. Convene a learning space where we may think together and share the wisdom in the room. It's nothing short than miraculous to consider that much of the work of equity advisors occurs not through given authority or mandates, but through their personal commitments and persuasive consultations with peers. They care. They choose to step into this role, and above all, they decide to hold their colleagues accountable as peers. They help campuses to be accountable for inclusive excellence because they do not focus solely on the immediate recruitment, but go beyond to interrogate the type of climate, policies for success, and other factors to shape the entire arc of the faculty career. and our faculty's abilities to successfully shape the learning environments more inclusively for our students. I know and I hope that we'll enjoy the conversations today, as our presenters all have been innovators and will share relevant projects and approaches that they will provide. We not only have people who are present today, but also virtually. And so I want to let those in the Zoom world know that we want to hear from you. And you can comment, open discussion by using the raise hand feature. And our technicians will unmute you and share aloud your questions and remarks. Those attending in person, I want to ask you to step to the microphones in this room, the Huntington room, or just speak to the central built-in microphones of other session room, that's the Newport room, to allow in-person and virtual participants to hear your comments through the audio system. And now I want to turn to thank yous. I want to thank our colleagues Amy Schroff and Cheryl Inkles from Berkeley for substituting to present respectively at sessions for their colleague Carrie Fresh, who is regrettably ill. We are sending best wishes to Carrie to feel better soon, and we thank our Berkeley colleagues for joining us. In addition, I want to welcome Susan Rivera as a co-presenter with Kim Sharma for our upcoming session on lessons learned from equity advisors. The most updated program information appears in our program book for Create and at the QR code webpage. I also want to thank the planning group for this symposium, because symposiums don't come together miraculously, for helping to craft these conversations to highlight a range of issues, but always keep equity advisors at the center of the conversation. I also want to thank those that have provided the patronage for our work, including the Advancing Faculty Diversity Grant Funding, our institutional leadership, including Provost Hal Stern and Chancellor Gilman, who've always been very supportive of pioneering new areas. And of course, Shirley Malcolm and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, whose forward-thinking strategies and organization of sea change have been inspirational on many fronts. I also want to acknowledge our chief diversity officers across the system and academic personnel partners as well. And finally, I really want to extend a heartfelt thanks to my team at the Office of Inclusive Excellence. They'll be taking notes throughout the sessions to provide us with written proceedings for future conversations. And now I'd like to have Hal Stern join us. Hal Stern is the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor and Chancellor's Professor, Department of Statistics at UCI. Provost Stern previously served as the founding chair of the Department of Statistics and dean of the Donald Brent School of Information and Computer Science and vice provost for economic planning. And prior to joining UCI, he held faculty positions at Iowa State University and Harvard University. Please join me in welcoming Provost Hal Stern.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for those remarks. They were really right on target, and it's a great event, and I want to share a few of the thank yous. First to you and your staff for pulling this together and supporting it all day, which is a lot of work, and so I'm really grateful for that effort. Also want to acknowledge the Advancing Faculty Diversity Grant that you received to support this kind of activity. It's really a great idea to bring together the equity advisors. So to all of you, thank you for being here today. It is really great to see faculty, equity advisors, and other diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders from across all the UC campuses come together, both in person and virtually, to collaborate around our shared interest in recruiting, retaining, an inclusive faculty. So it's a really great opportunity do some things, begin to do things in person. So I'm really glad to see people and glad that you're able to be here in Southern California and join us. I'm really excited about the recent decision to align all of the UC campuses with the AAAS Sea Change program that Doug mentioned. I think this creates a great opportunity for greater coordination of DEI efforts, not just across our system, but across other great universities in the country. As Doug said, the faculty equity advisors play a key role as counselors and advocates, and that for sharing practices and policies that can improve outcomes for faculty and students. I really found I learned the most about it when I was the dean, and the key role that the equity advisor could play, for me as a leader within the school. The equity advisors bring important perspectives and skills that promote a positive climate, and as Doug said, they're just another route, right? That is, people have ways of going to their chair if they're unhappy about something, or they're not shy about coming to the dean directly. But around questions of equity, it can be hard to do that. And having someone designated to be a colleague, an ally, I just found super impactful. As I think everyone knows, but UCI was one of the first was part of the first cohort to receive the NSF institutional transformation funding that led to the setting up of our advanced faculty equity advisor model. And it's been hugely impactful. Doug said this, and I just want to give a few examples of the way that's played out on our campus. The equity program has engaged more than 100 faculty over the years as equity advisors, and they are themselves an incredibly diverse group. More than 69%, almost 70% have been women, and 16% from historically underrepresented groups. And they, as I said, provide an incredibly valuable service for equity in a variety of ways across campus. Some of the things, again, at our campus and presumably many of yours as well, all of our search committees meet with an equity advisor to hear best practices and to see data, actual data. As a statistician, that's always been really important to me, to put in front of people the numbers, because everyone often thinks we're doing a better job than we are. And so being confronted with reality and data is really one of the key functions that I found extremely helpful. But the equity advisors and the advanced program have helped in so many other ways beyond just the search process. On our campus, again, nearly 200 dependent care travel awards through our advanced program, more than 100 career development awards, which have allowed some of our Senate faculty to participate in the faculty success program and learn a little bit more about how to get their work done and balance work and life. The advanced program played a key role in setting up our Chancellor's Postdoctoral Fellows program at UCI, which has led to a number of postdoctoral fellows making their way into our faculty and your faculties, and therefore helping to diversify the faculty across the board. Another way that less obvious, we use our equity advisors frequently when we have campus-wide programs as part of the review process. Doug's been key in that. We just ran a little local competition as part of our Black Thriving Initiative for faculty cluster hires, and those proposals were reviewed by the deans, but by the equity advisors as well, and a joint Senate admin academic planning group that we have. So it's a way of making sure that equity is kind of everywhere in our thinking, and so plays an important role. And I will say that model has been so ingrained and so powerful on our campus that it became the model for moving into the graduate student world, right? And so we have a program of decade mentors that are modeled on the equity advisors that play the same kind of function within each academic degree program, graduate degree program. So they meet with admissions committees. They are a venue for students to again have another route to make sure that their needs are met. And we're now trying to pilot ways of having this work in our administrative units for staff and making sure that staff equity is also taken serious. In closing, I just want to again thank you for being here. Say that I'm confident that UC will continue to be a national leader in this space, do the great work that all of you due to the great work that all of you do. I hope, and I know that you will, have a great and productive day talking with each other and sharing best practices and best ideas, and look forward to learning more from all of you about best practices and recommendations for going forward. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Al. I really appreciate your comments, but also just being present here and just being a stalwart supporter of the Advanced Equity Advisor model. And we want to turn now to our first session that, in truth, really builds on the comments that Provost Stern made about the system of support. And we were going to begin our next conversations by welcoming colleagues from the UC Office of the President who will set the context for this important perspective. We routinely reference a power of 10 when discussing the spirit of the University of California, its innovation, collaboration, and promise. Next, we'll hear from Vice President Pam Brown virtually and Vice Provost Susan Carlson in person. And so give me a moment to introduce Pamela Brown. She is the Vice President of Institutional Research and Academic Planning at the Office of the President. As noted in her biographical sketch in the program book, Vice President Brown oversees seminal data areas that track UC annual accountability, public information center data, undergraduate and graduate experience surveys, as well as other data and visualizations that inform system planning. She formerly served as Executive Director of UC Berkeley's Office of Planning and Analysis and received her undergraduate and graduate degrees at UCB. Susan Carlson is Vice Provost for Academic Personnel and Programs at the Office of the President and is a professor of history at UC That's right. A professor of English history, today. Thank you. Her oversight of UC policy, data, and practices for supporting faculty have touched the full scope of the faculty career, from recruitment and retention to advancement and diversity. She also oversees the University of California Press, the California Digital Library, Hallmark UC Centers at Sacramento and Washington, and the UC President's Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. Her research projects have examined Shakespeare and women playwrights, as well as team science and the influence of diversity. I encourage you to ready your questions for the conversation after their presentation. And now, let's welcome Pamela Brown and Susan Carlson.
I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity for Susan and I to speak to you. My hope today is to share some background and context about the UC 2030 goals, and then I'm going to turn it over to Susan to talk more about the work that's being done related to faculty and faculty diversity. Just as some background, the UC 2030 goals were established during President Napolitano's time. She was working with our chancellors to take a moment. We were celebrating our sesquicentennial. I love being able to say that word because I figured out how to pronounce it. But looking back at the last 150 years for the university and the contributions that we made to California and to the nation and beyond, the president and the chancellors wanted to provide a vision for what the university could do to the state, for the state of California over the next decade. And that's how the 2030 goals came together. I'm going to show you a dashboard that we have up in the UC Information Center, which has information at the campus and the system level. We use this information to have conversations with the Board of Regents, with legislators, and then at times with the chancellors and the president themselves. It gives us a way to illustrate where we're making progress and to highlight places where we're having greater challenges. And so if I figured this out after 2 years of working remotely, I'm going to share my screen. And now I'm hoping you're seeing a dashboard here, and I see a nod. Thank you so much. That's so reassuring. This is a dashboard that we have. I'm showing you one that's in development. We're just about to change it, but this is very similar to what is on the UC Information Center. It allows you to see information by campus and how that rolls up to the system. For the UC 2030 goals, they fell into three primary areas. The first was increasing degree attainment. The second one was promoting inclusive access and success for our undergraduate and graduate students. And then the third was to grow the faculty and diversify the faculty. If we think about those three goals together, the overarching purpose was to expand educational opportunities across UC's pathway, and in some cases, the pathway to the professoriate. So just briefly, each of these goals, for this first one here, the plan was to add 200,000 more degrees over the 1 million that we had projected. These were both undergraduate and graduate degrees. And this was going to address the gap in degrees that the organizations had projected, in part because the baby boomers were starting to retire. But it wasn't just enough for us to grow degrees. We really needed to be intentional about what that meant and looking for ways that our graduates in 2030 would better reflect the diversity of California. At the undergraduate level, the state is always interested in increasing undergraduates. What we wanted to get them to focus in on is ensuring that those students succeeded and thrived when they were at the university. So we had two primary goals. One was to ensure that 9 of 10 would leave with a degree. And the second was to improve timely graduation rates. So 4-year freshmen and 2-year transfer graduation rates. But in addition to that, we wanted to take a look at these persistent gaps that we've seen over time. We've seen continued improvements in timely graduation, but there continued to be gaps for our Pell, our first generation, and our underrepresented students. And these students represent the majority of California's public high school students. And so an overarching focus that we had was to eliminate those gaps and as we increase timely graduation rates. In doing that, that would not only reduce the cost for these students to get an undergraduate degree, it could increase the possibility that they would go on to graduate school and maybe go on to get a PhD. And this here is the newest aspect of the degree, the goals that we've included in with the 2030 goals. As I said, the state is interested in expanding undergraduates. We wanted to get them back interested in looking at investing in graduate education, and in particular, PhDs. So we established a goal that said that as we grow our graduate population, we're going to again focus on ensuring that they better reflect California's diversity by 2030. And the way that the campuses focused on doing that was looking at goals about increasing the proportion of UC PhDs that would either come from our undergraduate programs at the University of California or come from California state universities, other Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges and universities. And they set a goal that by 2030, over 40% of UC PhD students would have come from those institutions, thereby helping us increase the diversity of that. In part, that's important because that creates our own kind of availability pool, if we think about that. Currently, 25% of UC faculty got their PhD from the University of California. 20% of CSU's faculty got their PhD from UC. And so by the work that we would do in increasing the diversity and educating more academic doctoral students, we could support faculty diversity efforts within the University of California and with other institutions, which then gets us to the third goal and my handoff to Susan. The third area was a shorter term goal. It was looking at faculty growth over the next 4 years that we had when we established these goals. The plan was to add 1,100 ladder rank faculty. And our goal was to then track how much the diversity of new incoming faculty varied compared to the existing faculty, what it looked like on terms of separations. And we could use this as a way to track what our progress had been. What this highlights is that we are not on track to achieve that goal. We can see that there's even been a little bit of a decline with the pandemic in us being able to do that. And so what that does is it gives us a way to highlight the importance of growing and diversifying the faculty. And this is a space where we are not on pace to be able to do that. But I'm going to turn it over now to Susan, who's going to talk about the work that she and her colleagues have been doing to support you all with the efforts to grow and diversify the faculty. So Susan?
All right. Thank you, Pamela, my partner in all things UCOP, and including our attempt always to coordinate the colors that we're wearing. So I'm sorry that she's not here in person, so you could really see that. So what I wanted to do is follow up in a slightly different way of talking about the last point that Pamela made on the goal for increasing faculty numbers and increasing faculty diversity. And so I've got my first, before I get to my first slides, I wanted to just reinforce the importance of Irvine in the faculty equity advisor world. It's the birthplace of faculty equity advisors, and folks not only at UC but around the country have modeled programs after what UCI has done. In fact, I did that before I came here. I was at Iowa State University, where we put in place a faculty equity advisor program. So I know what kind of work is involved there. And it's great to be able to celebrate that and to compare notes on what we're all doing. And I also wanted to thank my colleagues at the Office of the President who helped me in putting together the numbers that I want to speak to. That includes my colleague Patricia Osorio-O'Day and Mark Lawson, who are here in person today, and others who are following us online, Gregory Sykes, Janine Chung, and Julie Elephant. Okay, next slide, please. So I've got 3 slides that focus on, next slide, please. There we go. On the grand numbers of faculty that we have at the University of California. So this slide gives you the last 7 years of data for ladder rank faculty and equivalent faculty. And you've got the new hires for each of those 7 years, followed by separations, followed by the difference, meaning we had so many new hires, we had so many leave, what's the difference? And you'll see that in the difference column is positive every year here. That hasn't always been the case, but as Pamela pointed out, we're still not meeting our overall goals. But a couple things I want you to notice here. One is that we do an incredible amount of hiring. Over those 7 years, we have hired 4,309 ladder rank faculty. So we have opportunities all the time to hire the faculty that we say we want. It's not, we can't say, well, faculty stay for 30 years, the turnover is slow. It's really not, in my way of looking at these numbers. And that's partly why I think we're here to figure out how to do a better job of hiring the faculty that we want. And we did this even during the pandemic, as you can see here. Again, these are the latest numbers we have, where we always lag a little bit in the way we can report on this. So we're increasing our numbers. They're still not what we want them to be, but we're moving in the right direction. It's not enough because, of course, you all know how many more students we have than we had 7 years ago. So we're still way behind in what we need. All right, so the next couple of slides are going to be variations on this slide. Next slide, please. So here again, you've got the first 2 columns are the same, new hires and separations. Then there's a third column that's new to this slide on resignations only. So I want to talk on this slide about retention issues, and then the next slide I want to go back to recruitment issues. Separations include basically three categories. One is retirements, and that's the largest group of folks who separate from the institution. The second are voluntary resignations, and the third tiny group of other includes unhappy things like deaths or dismissals. There aren't very many there, but it's important to recognize those exist as well. The resignations only column has those who voluntarily have decided to leave the institution. And I think we all know we need to pay attention to that and understand who those are, why they're leaving, and what that tells us about our institution, our climate in particular. So 817 of those, which is a lot. We all have anecdotal information about individual cases of folks we really wished had not left. But overall, what we can say about underrepresented groups is that of these resignations, the 817, 39% were women, and that compares to roughly 35% of the population overall during those years. So women left at a higher percentage than their representation in the faculty. For underrepresented minorities, there was a similar gap. 17% of those 817 resignations were underrepresented minorities, whereas during this time they accounted for about between 11 and 13% of the overall faculty numbers. So there's some work to do here, but I just wanted to give you kind of a general overview of thinking about issues of retention, which I know we'll continue to do during the rest of the day. Next slide, please. There we go. All right, so now we're turning back to hires, and we've got the same number of total hires here, the 4,309, but I knew you would be interested to see what's the breakdown by race and ethnicity. So you've got columns beginning from the left-hand side for underrepresented minorities, for Asian, Asian American, and for all others, including those who self-identify as white. The news I wanted to talk about is the percentage of underrepresented minorities among these, massive number of hires, 4,309 hires. And to look at just in these 7 years, the uneven progress, I guess we would call it, that we're making. Some years it went up, some years it went down. But I think the last 2 years that are represented here, so 2019-20 and 2020-21, are very encouraging. For the first time ever, system-wide, we've exceeded 20% of our hires as URM, 24.4% in 2020-21. I think that's a trajectory I'm predicting that will stay with us because of the kinds of efforts we're here to talk about today. There's a lot of other encouraging underlying ways or evidence that this is not a fluke, I think, but the way of the future. So we can talk a little more about these this background, but I wanted you to be able to think sort of globally because we're going to, for most of the day, be talking about individual departments and schools, colleges, and campuses. Okay, and then the second thing I wanted to do this morning, next slide please, was to talk to you about how we are hoping to assist what you're doing on campuses at the system-wide level. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 programs. And Pamela and I and our other colleagues at Office of the President, Yvette Goulat, will be joining a session later in the day, and others are here as well and presenting as well. See it as one of our main responsibilities to do what we can to assist you all. So these are the 3 programs, the PPFP and the Chancellor's Fellowship programs, Sea Change, and Advancing Faculty Diversity. So I'm just going to move through these very quickly. So next slide, please. I think you all know about the President's Postdoctoral Fellows Program and the Chancellor's Fellowship Program, which work in tandem. And Mark Lawson is here. He'll be talking about the program later today, so I'm not going to, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. But I thought it was really important to point out that a lot of money supports this program. And that money has grown in large part due to the advocacy of Mark and of the support that we've gotten at the highest level from the president of the university, the presidents of the university, the provosts, and the chancellors as well. So the operating costs there, the $5 million some dollars supports the largest number of fellows ever now, and Mark can speak to that later. The hiring incentive continues to provide just that little bit of incentive that hiring units need to think a little differently about how to manage recruitments. $10 million is a lot of money, and that's annual, and that's gone up year over year. As long as we continue to do more hiring of these fellows, there will be more money to support those hires. So it's a pretty extraordinary opportunity we have. Number of fellows has gone up as well. But I also wanted to note that it's really the system-wide nature of this program that provides us with enough flexibility to find the right home for our amazing fellows. Some of you were at the PPFP retreat last weekend, which first time they've been together in 3 years, and it was just this explosion of amazing talent and capacity. All right, the next slide, please. And I won't say much about this. Doug and Hal both mentioned the Sea Change collaboration we've now got with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And all campuses are participating beginning this year. President Drake's devoted money to support that. It's really important for us to continue to engage outside of UC. At UC, we tend to kind of look inward and figure out how to fix our problems just among ourselves. But you all know that the work that faculty do, in particular the research, is national and global in nature. So these affiliations are really important. And I think we all know that we can help lead nationally through Sea Change and through other affiliations as well. And then the final slide is on the, thank you, Advancing Faculty Diversity program. So my department at Office of the President is honored to have been the incubator for this program with money that came to us directly from the state of California, because leaders in the state were very unhappy with our progress in diversifying the faculty. And they were willing to put money behind it to support our work. It's a robust, effective program. Many of the PIs on the projects supported by this program are on the program today, so I'm pretty excited about how this convening just sort of emphasizes why this is money that needs to continue to be distributed to the campuses to support our work. I think what's really important is that it is all about changing the way we do business, both in recruitment and in retention and climate. And the people leading this project, which includes many of you both here in the room and on joining us virtually, are ready to take risks, to make change, and to put time and energy into doing this, and sometimes at the expense of the other things you know you want to do as well. But it really has supported those on the faculty, in the administration, and on the staff who want to build the best UC we can be, and that means we need a faculty committed to contributions to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've supported over 50 projects in the 6 years of the program. Next year will be the 7th year, and I hope you all know there's an RFP out for new projects due on May 16th if you want to apply for a new one. But it takes all partners at all of these levels. It takes faculty leadership for these projects. That's proven indispensable, but that doesn't work unless there's administrative support, genuine administrative support for this work, and staff who have responsibilities for making this work as well. And of course, equity advisors have been a huge part of this project as well. So that's, and then we can move to the next slide, which is the final slide. So I think Pamela and we have like 3 minutes. really want to have discussion, but maybe we can have one or two comments or questions that we could address. And thank you for letting us lead this off.
Hi, this is Mark Lawson, Director of PPFP. This is actually, I believe, a question for Pamela. Looking at the numbers and the goals for 2030, I'm sure there's some modeling behind that, looking at by how much we may miss these goals. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit and let us know what what you think that gap might be, and where you might see that happening, and what source of intervention.
Sure. So so you could see the gap that we have for the faculty hiring goal and the growing our faculty piece. That's definitely there. That's done technically by subtraction. So so you can see the modeling that's in there. It was a short-term goal, which is good because it gives us a way immediately to emphasize the importance of faculty growth. And we're looking at opportunities to expand capacity, and we're emphasizing the faculty growth piece as a component of that, both growing and diversifying the faculty. The other areas that are there, we can continue to grow, and we have continued to grow as a system. I've got a graphic that shows UC's path and how that's increased. I think we could be on target to achieve the degree attainment goals. The part that really takes the emphasis and the focus is ensuring that the students that end up graduating better reflect the diversity of the state of California. And that is for our undergraduate population and our academic doctoral population. And just as we saw challenges with the pandemic in the faculty hiring piece, in part, we're seeing the same thing for our undergraduate and our academic doctoral students, where at the undergraduate side, our Pell, first generation and underrepresented students, we see a drop in first year retention, which puts a flag that we're concerned about making progress in closing those gaps. And then we have heard about academic doctoral students having a delay in progress to their degree in that. So we're keeping an eye on both of those. I think we've got a lot of asterisks on the next few years of data that we've got to see what it looks like. But the benefit of having these goals is it allows us an annual way to come back and have an ongoing conversation about being intentional about how the University of California grows for students and faculty, and that's some of the things that we're seeing right now.
It looks like we have one more question here.
Hi, David Yu from UCLA. I just had a question around the categorization of how you're compiling the data. I guess for me, the Asian American / Asian category, I think in particular, it's an issue around disaggregating the data, because I think it really, sometimes the categories mask as much as they reveal, or they obscure as much as they reveal. So I think if we're trying to get more nuanced understandings of how we're doing the hiring and what the numbers mean, I think that obviously you could talk about that with a lot of the other categories as well. But I just think, especially if you think about which groups are included under those kind of umbrella categories. But also I would say that if Asian means kind of international, then that experience is different than, say, US born. So I think there are lots of ways in which I realize that those numbers they can obscure as much as they reveal. That's, I guess, my point.
Yeah, if you're speaking to the categories I was showing, they are rolled up categories, as you note, and I didn't speak at all to the international population of our faculty, which is a quarter. So a quarter of our faculty were not born in the U.S. and are not yet citizens. So it's sizable, and you're right, it makes a difference. Sylvia?
Your reports actually separate. You have domestic.
Yes,
only.
yeah.
All your accountability reports actually have domestic, and I go straight to that to see what's going on. So.
Yeah, right. So when I was reporting on the underrepresented minorities, that includes both international and domestic. And maybe we'll have chances during the day to talk more about that. Pamela, did
Yeah,
you want
and
anything?
we do disaggregate those when we're looking at it within that dashboard that was there. I didn't show you, but we break those out. And on the student side, we definitely break out and disaggregate it into the different categories. It's an excellent point. We do miss things when we roll it up in a way. So I appreciate that.
And of course, we didn't layer on a gender and race ethnicity at the same time, which of course we could also do if we had more time. But we are already 2 minutes and 47 seconds over. So thank you all.